There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Exodus. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. And so Moses, he sees this fire on the mountain of God. And to see a fire in the mountains is probably not too unusual. And we don't know how long he's been out there with his sheep. But this fire, it just kept burning. But it didn't spread and it didn't burn itself out. And so maybe he spent like a half a day out there just looking up there and watching and seeing nothing change. And so maybe he might have thought it was like some kind of mirage or some type of reflected sunlight. But whatever it was, it caught his interest because he had never seen anything like this in his 40 years of shepherding. And a lot of people find a lot of symbolism in the burning bush. Some will say, well, it's a picture of Israel. It's that they're suffering, but they're the light of the world without ever being consumed. And some people, they think it's a picture of Moses, that Moses is this weak bush, but he's being empowered by the fire. And I don't know. I just think it was just a way to get Moses' attention. Just that it wasn't something that you saw every day. So I'm imagining that Moses, he watched it from a distance for a while. And it says that the angel of the Lord had appeared in the flame. And when it says the angel of the Lord, this is not just an angel of the Lord. When it talks about the angel, the definite article, it's always talking about God himself. And more specifically, this is Jesus Christ before ever becoming a man in the flesh. And so now as Moses, he gets closer, he sees this great sight and why this bush burns without being consumed. And then the bush calls to him. And if you had this happen to you, you would have thought you'd gone crazy and that you'd been alone in the wilderness way too long. And now this bush, it knows his name. And the angel calls to him and says, Moses, Moses. And then he calls his name twice. And then now you find Moses and he's answering back to the bush. And so if you didn't think he was crazy, you would think he was crazy now, because now he's talking to the bush. And Moses says, I'm here. Here I am. And Moses, he didn't see anyone in the bush, but God's presence was in the flame. And the first thing God said to him was to warn Moses to take off his shoes and to keep his distance. And so Moses, he never did ever get to look at that burning bush up close, because this is like God saying to him, stop, don't come any closer. And that's because there's always a distance between God and man, where God is holy. And this place is now holy. And it's holy because God is there. And it's not going to be defiled by a bunch of dirty shoes. All those places where you walked in the world getting yourself all dirty. So it's kind of like going to your grandmother's house and where she tells you to take off your shoes because you're not going to track all that dirt in here. And the angel of the Lord, he's already appeared a few times in the book of Genesis. We know that he appeared to Abraham at least twice, and that he also wrestled with Jacob before he met with his brother Esau. And when God calls your name twice, it implies that it's very important and that there's an urgency. And so the first thing God does is he tells Moses that he's not some kind of new God, but he's the same God that Moses had already heard of, the same God that he had heard of since he was a baby, the same God of his fathers. And then God calls his fathers by name. And he says, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And if you read that, we did, you saw that happen 3 times. So up to this point, We don't know if Moses ever really believed in God, or if he had just thought it was a bunch of stories that he had been told as a child. Before I was saved, I had no idea that Jesus was real and that Jesus was the real God, although I had heard of him because I was raised in the Catholic Church. But just like Moses here, until Jesus revealed himself to me as a person, I didn't know he was real. In fact, I would have believed God could have been anyone else because I had already heard of Jesus my whole life, and I didn't see him doing anything out of the ordinary in my life. But by God revealing himself, it makes all the difference. And so now Moses, he's afraid to look at the bush because now he knows that this is God. And I really like how God is real gentle with Moses and that he doesn't scare him. And Moses, he knows that he's not clean. And he knows that he's not holy. He has a deep sense that he's a sinner, and he knows that he's a murderer. And now God reveals to Moses that he has seen all the suffering of the Jews in Egypt, and he's heard them crying. And now it's time, and now he's ready to deliver them all. And so this also is a lot like today, where there are so many people where they don't know that God cares for them because they're looking at the circumstances that they're in and they're looking at their suffering. But it's not true. And even though it's difficult for them to believe that God sees them and that God cares for them, and then to tell these people that God also wants to deliver them, they have a real hard time believing that. But the truth is that God does these things in people's lives over and over and over. And he not only just delivers people from sin and death, but he also delivers us from anything that is not his will for us in our lives. Anything that is not for our good, if we'll let him. And now I know there's a lot of people who will say, well, God has never delivered me. And they might go, well, he's never delivered me from the drugs or from the alcohol or from some other type of besetting sin that's oppressed them for a long time. And I remember I've struggled with some things. And I heard this pastor once say, God promises to deliver you from your enemies, but he never will deliver you from your friends. And so if those sins are your friends, he won't deliver you from them. So to be delivered from those kind of things, those things have to be your enemy. But to be clear, God, he still delivers people today from their burdens, and he always sees when we're oppressed, and he always cares about it. And so now God, he reveals his plan to Moses to bring the Jews to the land he promised to Abraham, flowing with milk and honey. And milk is referring to the pasture lands, and honey is referring to the fruitfulness with all the bees pollinating the flowering trees. And if it's not that, it means it's referring to all the date honey, because Israel is filled with all these date palms, and they boil the dates and they make the syrup and they call it date honey. And then God mentions all the different tribes of people living in the area. So Moses knows exactly where God is going to be sending them, that he is sending them to the land of Canaan. So now God, he invites Moses to come along with him on this adventurous journey, and that he will send Moses to Pharaoh. And you would almost think that Moses would say, great, I've always wanted to do this. I knew this was my calling in life, and I'm ready to go. But Moses, what he does is he gives God 5 reasons why he can't accept God's call. Now you have to remember, Moses, he's 80 years old here, and he's not the same man that he was when he left Egypt. That man is gone. Those days are over, along with his self-confidence. And sometimes when we get older, we try to escape our calling, because our callings, and when we're called, it costs us a lot. And if you read this, you will see that Moses pays quite a personal price to be able to lead God's people out of Egypt. but it's always worth it because it's always rewarding to see God work. Because what you gain is you gain all this fellowship and intimacy with God as you are working together. And there is nothing else like that. And although Moses is arguing with God, I'm sure that he is really glad that he didn't argue his way out of it, because God didn't make Moses go. Moses went out of his own free will. He had a choice, because we always have a choice to obey God or not. And that's because God is always a gentleman. And God, he knows this man. And though Moses is arguing, God knows that Moses really wants to go. And God is so patient with him. And so God, he actually lets him argue. And so Moses' first reason why he can't do this is because he's a nobody. And he says, who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And so this is what Moses thinks of himself. He thinks he's a nobody. But it took a really long time to get Moses to this place. But here, Moses is just looking at himself. But who Moses is, it really doesn't matter. What matters is who God is. That's what matters. And so God says to Moses, he says, I'll be with you. And then God tells him, and I'll prove it to you. And this is going to be a sign to you that I sent you, because you're going to bring them all back right here. They're going to serve God right here on this mountain, right where you're standing. And a lot of times when we need to be delivered, we look at things the same way, where we look at ourselves, where we think we can be delivered, and we can be delivered by our own power. If we just had enough faith, well, then we could do it. But we need to change our focus from ourselves to who God is. Because if we had the ability to deliver ourselves from our problems, we would have done it already. So we need to remove that faith from being in ourselves and from our abilities, and we need to place it on God and on his abilities. All right. So God tells Moses that he'll go with him, but that doesn't satisfy Moses. And so then Moses, he gives a second reason why he can't go. And he says, well, what am I going to say to him? What am I going to say to them? I don't even know your name. How am I going to introduce you? What am I going to say? The fire bush sent me. And if you remember 40 years ago, both of these groups, the Pharaoh and the Jews, they didn't quite like Moses all that much when he left Egypt. No one accepted him. In fact, they all pretty much chased him out of town. So what's going on here, it's not that Moses is really asking God what his name is, but what he's really asking him here is, what kind of God are you? You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.